My name is Jeff Jur. I'm the cinematographer on the film. The film was shot in the fall of 1986, and I was basically recruited by the producer, Dora Bacharach, who had seen some of my work, and I subsequently met Emile Ardolino, the director, about the same year, and we met in Los Angeles and then in New York, and I got hired to do the film. I actually hesitated because I wasn't sure it was what I wanted to do. I had read a script for a television project that I liked a lot. I was planning on doing that, and she had basically convinced me that this was the right move for my career at the time. I was pretty naive about how things work, and I'm eternally grateful to her for convincing me to do the project. These are shots that were in the body of the film that were taken by a company in New York, R. Greenberg, that manipulated it, slowed it down, made it black and white, and laid over the titles over this, and did a beautiful job. It's got a great sensual sort of feeling, and totally sets the tone, I think. I will take credit for the pink color in there because that was a color that was used throughout the film in the lighting, so I think it was something they tried to tie into. It was a color that we came up with on the set to film some of the dance sequences.
I'm David Chapman, the production designer on Dirty Dancing. I had an immediate positive reaction to the script of Dirty Dancing. And in fact, when I went to the interview with Emile and Linda and Eleanor Bergstein, my first words out of my mouth was, if you folks will push this thing to the limit of a PG-13, it will be an enormous hit. And they practically applauded at that point. One of the most enjoyable pictures I ever worked on, I think, thanks to the incredible generosity of Emile and Eleanor. Everybody felt like they were free to participate and contribute 100% of what they could do, which is unusual on a picture. They don't cry.
That was before President Kennedy was shot, before the Beatles came.
I am Kenny Ortega, choreographer of Dirty Dancing.
I am Miranda Garrison. I played Vivian, the cabin bunny, and also the associate choreographer to the beautiful Mr. Kenny Ortega.
Emile had a great love in his heart for dance, great love. And so the reason why we got 200% every single day, and no one cared about coming in early to rehearse and to shoot all night, whether it was 38 degrees or 115 degrees, was because we had a director at the helm of this project that was respectful of every bit of energy that everyone was putting into the project, supported your creative thinking, and that's why these scenes evolved.
I think that extraordinary, talented, in-depth humility of a true artist is what, in so many ways, imbued what was a very simple story that could have gone a lot of directions. I think one would have to credit a lot Emile's humanity in making this movie still appealing to people.
I would also say that from the very, very beginning, he said, to make this film, we have to have a strong point of view, and this movie unfolds through the eyes of Baby. And Eleanor wrote this, and I think that Eleanor is Baby, and that I think that Emile directed this film with the sensitivity and innocence and wonderment of that character. He almost put himself into Jennifer Grey as a director and became almost one with that character. So there was this sort of sense of wonder about him and spontaneity about the way that we worked and the way that he shot this film that was very much the essence of her character.
And that's a wonderful thing to add to the list of what is an artist, because the spirit of play, I would say maybe even put at the top of the list. The spirit of play, childlike wonder, those are the true artists. And I think, again, to have a project be successful, allowing artists the freedom to have that playground ultimately for the money makers, I think it's proven. Look at the money you can make by letting artists play.
1, 2, 3, 4, dry your caboose and shake it loose. 1, 2.
I'm Hilary Rosenfeld. I was the costume designer on Dirty Dancing. It was never a drama, so it was never something that was supposed to be, dead on serious. I know that both Eleanor and Linda had very specific personal ideas about what they thought the clothing should look like. It has to be a piece of its time because, of course, you know, it's hard to convince people. You know, I mean, people have memories of things like what did you wear in 1980? Like you can sort of remember, like maybe you wore jeans, but what cut were they? You just have a vague memory, really. People do, unless they have a picture of themselves. It was a rustic hotel, but they definitely dressed up. You know, now people, you can go anywhere in jeans. You're talking about a time when if these people went to New York, let's say, from their suburban home, the mother would wear white gloves, She would be much more dressed up than anyone can imagine.
Some of the design of the film came out of discussions that David Chapman, the production designer, and I would have in pre-production. Basically, while Emile was off rehearsing with the actors and dealing with the dance rehearsals, he and I would sit in my hotel room and just go through the whole film and talk about how we were going to photograph it, how he was going to design it. We would draw overhead drawings, we would make shot lists, we would present some of this to Emile. Everything went through Emile. He had the last word on it, but he was really interested in having us bring this stuff to him.
I have to remind you, this is a family place. That means you...
The idea behind the scene here is that we're seeing it all from Baby's point of view. You'll notice there's very little coverage that goes into the scene. The attempt was always to try and see the movie through her eyes. So quite often you'll see a lot of subjective camera looking at things from her point of view or over her shoulder.
Well, if it isn't the entertainment stand.
That jacket, we kind of found that, actually, we bought that jacket off of one of my interns. Here you wanted to establish Patrick's character, Johnny, as a bad boy and not one of the group. I mean, look how he stands out in terms of the color.
It's the same in all these places. Some ass in the woods, maybe?
I'm all for getting as much in the camera as possible. I believe that you should design a film as much as you can in pre-production and on the set and have an idea of how you want to present the film. The point of view is so key for me when you're shooting, and the camera should reflect that. I'm not a big fan of tons of coverage and sorted out in the editing room. The films that I like the best are the ones that I feel that are designed ahead of time.
Most of my research centered on what the real Catskill resorts looked like at the time. And Eleanor had a lot of pictures of the Catskills resorts that were so popular in the late 50s and early 60s, anywhere from really just prior to the Second World War up through the mid-60s when it all began to come unglued up there. And Eleanor and I went up for a couple of visits to Grossinger's, which was in the process of closing at the time, and they were very generous with photographs of their operation.
Max, our baby's gonna change the world.
And what are you going to do, Missy?
Oh, Lisa's going to decorate it.
I think she already does. Doc, I want you to meet someone. My grandson, Neil. Goes to the Cornell School of Hotel Management.
Oh, baby's starting Mount Holyoke in the fall.
Oh, great.
Eleanor remembers these days, shared her memories of these days with us right off the bat, of going to these hotels with her parents as a young girl and dancing on her daddy's feet in the arms of her dad and coming of age, with these great, wonderful bands and entertainers that would come to the hotels and where the Johnnies of the world would come and teach and keep the ladies entertained while the guys were in the poker room, and times haven't changed that much. All you have to do is to go to a spa pretty much anywhere in the country, and some of that still exists. But anyway, Eleanor, really knew this world.
Now, I think you can see choreographically it was very important to create the kind of dancing that the average person who was a guest at the hotel would feel pretty good about having accomplished a basic step. So the fact that Johnny and Penny step forward and do this outrageous dance in the middle of the guest party.
Yeah.
Number one is shocking and sexy and fabulous, and number two is going to piss off the owner because they're supposed to be there accommodating the guests. And I remember Emile was very meticulous about making this moment very shocking and inspiring to the guests, but yet displeasing to the owner and his son because they're not supposed to be enjoying their own facility for such outrageous skill. I think that's an amazing thing, too, seeing Jennifer's reaction to Penny and Johnny dancing for the first time, because their level of artistry is something that all of the other people in the room will never even hope to match. And it's extraordinary when you live in a normal, average life and you're not really an artist to see something like that.
And the partnership that, just watching a man and woman and, in this kind of a partnership, being in sync with one another, one heartbeat, one mind, one goal.
And they're breaking the rules right now by doing this dance, and that passion to dance in that moment to that song overrides their possible displeasure of the boss.
No one else could have played this part other than Cynthia Rhodes. Do you agree?
Cynthia was extraordinary, extraordinary.
Yeah, she just had it all. The talent, the emotion, the range. What an extraordinary young woman, and she gave it all up. Shortly after Dirty Dancing, she decided that she just really enjoyed the idea of being a mom.
Being a mom.
The dress that Cynthia's wearing was made for her. Patrick kept getting his finger stuck in the back of the dress, which was a problem. In order to have her feel totally secure, it couldn't just be backless. I saw a bit of rehearsal while they were still in New York, and spoke to Kenny Ortega and spoke to Emile Ardolino, and then I designed things. They saw sketches, they approved sketches, and I had them built here in New York, and then they were shipped to location, and they were fit on location. So when they actually got to wear the clothes, no dress rehearsal, was when they started to shoot.
Say, would you like to help me get things started?
Sure she would.
Well, there's a classic example of a point of view, literally her point of view being turned to the side. I thought it would be funny, and they ended up using it. This was a set that was built on a location. It was just basically a big warehouse. David Chapman, who designed this film, took these barns basically and converted all of them into the various locations you see in the film. Did an amazing job. What was great is we had a lot of space to work with. We could get the camera out and around pretty easily. I had room above to light. That's a key thing for most cinematographers, is to have some height.
There's a slightly different approach to visuals and to particularly techniques that theater people share that movie people either don't know about or don't use, or they're just not aware of. And so Emile and I did have a shorthand in that world that was very comfortable.
The idea of the two worlds is obviously important here, and her transition from the front of the hotel, where all the main guests and the main house is, and then the back where the kids live, and trying to show the contrast between those two worlds was important. The lighting in the back was obviously a little deeper colors, a little more earthy, a little more sexual. And the front, it was a little brighter. Pink was an important part of that color scheme in the front of the hotels. And in the back, red was a key kind of color.
Hi. How'd you get here?
I was taking a walk.
Go back.
Let me help you.
No.
I remember when Emile first talked to me about the choreography in the film, one of the very first things he said was that we have something in Jennifer Grey, and what that something was it was raw and organic and honest, and that's what he fell in love with, and that there was naivete and pathos and the poetry of a real young girl that was coming of age. And he wanted to make sure that I appreciated that in her, and that I was selective and careful about what I taught her, and that it was more about inspire her use the dance as a means of inspiration as opposed to like putting movement on her. And so from the very start here, she had never seen the dance. We didn't let her.
Right.
We kept her out of the rehearsals until we felt that we were far enough into what we wanted it to be. And then when we exposed her to the Dirty Dancing, we exposed it to her almost for the first time on the set.
We tried to give it as much life and as much richness as we could. I think it was through talking with Eleanor and Jeff and Emil, the whole idea of memory, that things are, oh God, when you go back to your hometown, for instance, and it looks so small when you used to think it was so big, or that we could use that, just picking and choosing things that are in the frame or not in the frame to help that feeling. And somehow or other, we all knew when we were right, when we had that feeling. And it kind of paid off, I think, in the sense of that the film worked so well on that level.
Steadicam was a big part of the show. Obviously, the ability to move with dance and stuff was very important. Ted Churchill, who was one of the original Steadicam operators, came in and without really talking about it too much, and he would get in there and just move with the dancers and create something that we hadn't even thought of. So I owe a lot of that to a lot of the look of the show to him.
When you go through the dancers, Kenny stood behind the Steadicam operator and guided the Steadicam operator through this dirty dance in order to tell the story of what Baby is seeing.
And what Emil wanted here was he wanted Baby to be introduced to this world, to Johnny's world, in a real powerful and impacting way. He wanted her life to change at this moment. This was a metamorphosis in her life. This was a transition that she could never step back from. This was that turning point in her young life, where everything else would now be shaped from having had this moment. And so we had a huge challenge here.
Quite often we would shoot night scenes like this in the daytime. I'm pretty sure this was done in the daytime. We would just black out around the building to take out the sunlight, and the idea was to be, you know, sensual, to light from above, to use red lights to, you know, make it kind of a sexy place, but also lighting from above gave us the freedom to move the camera around quite easily. Smoke was a big part of the kids' world that wasn't in the front of the in the front part of the hotels.
I think something too about Emil, which I think you can describe better than I can, but I know Emil was very careful in selecting camera angles for this scene in particular to give Johnny stature, for instance, when he walks in the room. And I know you would probably have better memories of that, but I remember a lot of discussions and a lot of concern on Emil's part that he shoot this particular scene to highlight her vision of Johnny in a way that his stature looms larger than anybody in the room, and that what her eye sees in that room are sensual images that she has never been exposed to before in her life.
And that everything in the room radiates off of him. Everything in the room is an extension of his energy. It's an extension of his passion. It's an extension of who he is. And so we spent a lot of time getting to know one another, and Patrick came to know all of these kids and vice versa, as did Cindy. And so this room was of the same soul, of the same spirit. There was a kinship, you know. Made him that much bigger than life because it all was an extension of his character.
Now, for instance, in seeing Andrew come down the stroll line with the cigarette and the tattoos and that wonderful vest behind Johnny, if it were traditional choreography, that nuance isn't as noticed, but that's why I say this type of choreography is misunderstood and not credited enough, because the playground that was created for these dancers around to get that performance out of Andrew, who is layering that behind Patrick's performance, enhances the masculinity of Patrick. It gives him a best buddy who's wilder than Patrick in a way, a little bit too wild for Baby.
Good.
There is some white and there is some black, but Patrick really stands out. In his white shirt with his black pants, and that's the goal, you know. Jennifer in her dress really stands out. There are other girls wearing, you know, they're more casual than she is. It's all about being able to easily pick out the leads from the background.
We come to know a lot about Baby right here when Johnny brings her out onto the dance floor. This sort of gives us that there's a little bit of a fighter there.
Brave.
Somebody who's got some courage that we're going to come to know more and more as the story unfolds, but that this naive little girl actually allows herself to be drawn into this situation and take part in it, shows us a little early glimpse of a character that we're about to come to fall in love with and to really appreciate.
Ladies, join our hair-raising wig show. Try your Sandra Dean Jackie Kennedy.
We were in an enormous rush because the picture takes place in the summer in the Catskills. And we were up against the leaf turning, you know, in the Catskills for openers, which, among other reasons, ruled out the Northeast for this picture. And Doro Bachrach did a bunch of research and found that in North Carolina, in that little pocket where we wound up doing most of the picture, was one of the last places in the country where the leaves turn. So we scouted Lake Lure, North Carolina, and found a boys' camp that was about to be bulldozed to make way for a subdivision. And its only drawback was is it didn't have a hotel of sufficient scope to do the hotel end of it. And again, I think it was through Doro's researches that we came upon the hotel in Blacksburg, Virginia, that became the hotel for the front of house, if you will, of the picture. And Lake Lure became all of the back, you know, the back stairs, as it were, all of the staff quarters and the gymnasium at the boys' camp. We turned into our big ballroom, and we used a lot of the buildings that had serviced that boys' camp, as, for instance, our Dirty Dancing studio and our rehearsal studios, things like that.
I'm really proud of this scene. I think it has a great sort of glow to it. I love the look of the bulbs on the background. I think it was something David and I had talked about. He was going to put bulbs in, but I kept saying, well, we're not going to see them if they're too high, so he had to bring them down into the shot, and he did that beautifully.
Hi, Max. Aren't my dance lessons starting to pay off?
Miranda plays Vivian. Miranda got this role. Miranda came to be my associate choreographer on the project and left, having played one of the most memorable characters in the film. Originally, this role was going to be played by another actress, and she became ill, and then they brought in another actress from New York to play the role, and they actually started filming. And while they were filming, I was standing below, watching up there, saying to Miranda, I'm telling you, you're going to end up playing this part. She thought I was nuts. Patrick didn't have a rapport with this actress, and the next morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, Miranda was reading for the part, and 10 minutes after she read for the role, she was in hair and makeup and wardrobe and was given the part by Emile and Eleanor and became this wonderful, luscious vixen.
I do have an additional story about that. When we first got on the set to film it, I actually in those days dance very well, and I didn't dance on camera, obviously because Vivian, it didn't make sense that her character would dance well. So when I first got into Patrick's arms, he and I were pretty darn sexy.
Yeah.
So sexy that Emile stopped the whole action and made us wait till the other end of that particular shoot night to do this scene because he had to cool us down. Do you remember that? So this was actually the very last shot, I think, of this night, and I remember it being very cold.
Last week, I took a girl away from Jamie, the lifeguard, and he said to her right in front of me, "What does he have that I don't have?" And she said, 2 hotels.
It's one of those things that is so unique, a world so unique, that it becomes universal. The more we got into it, the more we introduced little touches of spangles and glitter and contrasted with the deep, dark corners and shadows, it does become a fairyland in a sense, but created out of things that are really there or would really be there or could really be there. Little Christmas lights, for instance, in the one of the rehearsal dance spaces. That kind of thing that gives the picture a glow and a magic, I guess is the best way to put it.
Brownie, some milk, leftover rice pudding, beets.
Quite often we worked against what was being done at the time in terms of films in the 80s. The idea of a slick package was not part of the plan. It was more about being dramatic and being true to the period. I mean, the idea was that this place be very happy. This was an innocent time in American culture, in American life, and it was really specifically set in 1963 to put it ahead of all the stuff that happened and what we've become known as the 60s, that it's a little darker period. So this was right before that. So we wanted the film to be light, and that was part of the lighting plan.
What's wrong?
It's so funny. All these young girls watch this movie, and all these parents let them watch it, and it's really very off-color. It's really very off-color. Actually, my daughter and I had this long conversation about, well, there's an abortion in this movie. Like, Mom, what do you think of abortion? It's interesting because people don't remember this part of it. They just remember the dancing, and that's it.
Okay, Johnny's here. It's okay. It's okay.
I guess I had recently seen The Karate Kid, which was that great small picture about a young boy overcoming all kind of difficulties to sort of triumph in the world. And I felt like Dirty Dancing was a female version of that, though Eleanor shudders every time she hears me say that. It was a great story about a young girl who, finding her way in life and finding out how to be an adult and how to be an honorable person. And I had never seen or heard of another film that did that took the female point of view of a young woman, turning, into an adult and doing it so gracefully and so well.
Oh, God, it's hopeless.
I think what Emile gave us was this sense that the period was important as a setting, but that the look of the show shouldn't necessarily reflect that period. It shouldn't be a film that looked like it was photographed in 1963 or 2 or whatever. And in fact, as the film progressed in the post-production and they were bringing in music that wasn't period music and stuff like that, I realized that the film was really a fantasy and that it's maybe a time that never existed, and that it wasn't important to be so realistic, that the fantasy was really more important. And so I think that we were feeling that in some of the scenes where the lighting takes a little more of a leap, like the finale, for instance, which is probably more elaborate than they would have done, but because of the story and where you are at that point in the film, it fits perfectly. But I'm proud of the fact that we held true in many cases to the look of a film set in that period, that we were true to that period. I feel that if it was hyped up too much in the photography and the editing, whatever, if it was too stylish, that it would put people off, that you wouldn't be able to plug into this story of real people who just happen to dance. And because it's not sort of fixed in a particular time period, that it's a story that could happen at any time and that people can seem to plug into it over generations. I've had 12-year-old girls get excited by the fact that I worked on this because it's their favorite movie, and they weren't even born when it was made.
You make me sick. Stay away from me.
It's a classic story. It's not a different story. It's a story it's one of the top 10 stories that are being told and retold in literature and in film. You know, it's the good girl falls in love with the bad boy.
What am I doing wrong?
You're lining it up a little wrong, Marge.
Some of the things we took from our research on the Catskills was the degree of richness, the degree of lushness of the Northeast in the summertime. We planted, it became a joke, it became a movie about grass, trying to get the lawn at the hotel seeded and bright green and lush looking. And then our boys' camp, the bulldozers had actually beat us to it. So there were great swaths of red earth showing here and there, which we had to get grass growing on in a hurry. But we needed the lush feeling of, you know, midsummer in the Northeast, in what was August, September in North Carolina. So that became quite a feat, just to get the grass to grow fast enough.
That was a stupid thing to ask. Forgive me. I'll have it for you before dinner.
Is everything all right?
Fine.
Thanks.
You know, we talked about this dancing earlier, you know, how this came about, you know, this wonderful workshop, living together, eating together, sleeping together. We really all lived together. We lived right there where we were shooting this movie, you know, minutes away in an old hotel and these old quarters that belonged to a Boy Scout camp.
Yes, and I would like to go on record in support of the dancers that they did call their hotel the Bates Motel.
The Bates Motel.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope it was worth it.
Eleanor was instrumental in presenting a lot of this wonderful old music. We also discovered it from our own libraries. Each of us, you know, a lot of it had favorites. It was beautiful as that most of these kids, you know, were too young to have grown up during this period. And this was my heyday. I mean, I was in junior high school and high school in the 60s. And I had my own Dirty Dancing story that I shared with Eleanor and Emil, which I remembered somebody actually, one of the teachers at a dance, a Saturday night dance that we had at my junior high school, getting on a microphone and saying, if there's any more dirty dancing, the lights are on and the dance is over. And they used to have these faculty members that would walk around the dance floor, and if you were too close to your partner, they would just put their hands right between you and push you apart. You know, Dirty Dancing was never a dance. It was a reference that adults made about a certain kind of dancing in my world, in my life. And so I just went back to there, and I remembered these incredibly beautiful black girls that would ask me to dance, that were the most soulful creatures on the planet, that woke me up on every level. And when I got on the dance floor with them, I just, you know, I broke into a sweat, and I was a skinny kid with big ears, and all of a sudden I was like a hot Latin heartbreaker, and I became popular because I could get into these sort of places with the music and the dance. So Dirty Dancing for me was something that I remembered from growing up, and that it was a dance that was taboo to our teachers, and that they felt that Dirty Dancing was too much body contact, it was sexually suggestive, it was too friendly, and that it could lead to improper behavior.
Or beyond. Let's not forget that this is an era before the pill.
You gotta start on the two. Find the two, you understand?
Told you I never did any of these dances before.
Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. No.
One thing that I felt Emil, the director, brought to the film was that it was important to him that the audience see what it's like to learn how to do something, how to learn how to dance. And I think he fought quite a lot to get this sequence and this storyline in the film. It was important to see her struggle with it. And obviously, you know, there's the romantic interest in the story at this point too, but he was somebody who loved dance and loved the process of learning how to do it. He made a documentary about kids, you know, inexperienced kids learning how to dance, and that was really important to him. So this montage is really part of that, and I think it makes the film deeper because of that. It's a process that was really important to him.
Miranda had a lot to do with this part of the movie again. Miranda being a teacher at Arthur Murray, coming from, you know, teaching ballroom. In rehearsals, she said, she coined a phrase that ended up in the film, which was, "This is your space, and this is my space. I don't invade your space, you don't invade my space." The locking, the on the two, being on the two, that she infused all of her knowledge about instruction, and which became incredibly important and helpful in the development of this entire montage, which is one of the strongest pieces in the whole film.
I think Emile and Eleanor were very rigorous and very open also to really wanting to understand the teaching process and the right terminology. So I think a lot of that a dialogue, which really comes from the Arthur Murray days about the spaghetti arms, your dance frame, using unusual teaching techniques of going up and down a stairs, 3 people dancing together, and Emile shooting the rehearsals and having the wonderful eye to be able to, in a discerning way, pick out wonderful process techniques about teaching, which he would also turn into metaphor, which would support the story.
It behooved us to work with Jennifer in a lot of this moments before. Now, she took classes with Miranda and I, and she came to some rehearsals, but there were certain parts in this film where we felt that that would work against her character and work against the sort of honesty of the moment. And so she really did learn to dance on camera.
Head up. Lock your frame. Lock it. Lock. Look, spaghetti arms. This is my dance space. This is your dance space. I don't go into yours, you don't go into mine. You gotta hold the frame.
This is Cynthia Rhodes now basically doing Miranda Garrison. That she basically just watched Miranda and adapted that aspect into her character, you know. And this was very sexy, you know, where Penny now is embracing the idea of Baby and accepting her help and coming to appreciate her, and where now this wonderful bond happens between the 3 of them. And that was a moment also that Emile and Eleanor saw in rehearsals. And with Miranda, when we were working with Jennifer, the 3 of us were all working together, and they said, "Oh, we love that." And so that got incorporated, and Penny, you know, became, you know, the 3rd partner in that piece.
I think it's great for people to watch the film, what goes into creating a dancer.
And look at
the
this.
process is so interesting.
And this moment here, I mean, you know, the story that now the girls, you know, that were, you know, adversaries, where there was no trust, there was, you know, a total mistrust coming from Penny to Baby, and you know, not trusting these people from this other world, that suddenly, you know, Penny and Baby are in each other's arms.
I think another thing to say about Emile too, and this celebrates the costume department. If you'll notice these were meticulous choices with Emile and Eleanor and Kenny in terms of her coming of age costume-wise. All of a sudden you'll see a little lipstick coming on, or a high heel coming on, or a little belly button now beginning to show.
The tights are period, but the crop top is not. You know, the reality is that people didn't wear quite such high-cut legs, but here you go. They want it hot, hot, hot. But, you know, what does she have that's hot? Nothing. She brought her suitcase, and where's she going to get the clothes? She's on vacation. So, you know, the idea was to just put her in things that she would have that would allow her to look a little bit hotter. You know, you're going on location and you're really creating a world.
This was all very real. It was very late. Everyone was exhausted. She got the giggles. Patrick definitely wasn't happy at this moment, but yet both of these wonderful actors knew how to stay in the moment, and a great sequence.
Yeah, and that's again why I say about this type of choreography, creating a playground in which this kind of contribution or creativity of finding that one easy step that has become really sort of a legend moment comes out of the entire setup, if you will.
What you want to try to achieve in a film, a dance film, like this anyway, is that you don't want the story to stop for the dance to start. That you want to find a seamlessness. You want them to become of the same fabric. You want to be able to, there to be a tapestry between the acting and the dancing, the storytelling, and so that the dance becomes a part of the characters and enables you to continue the story forward. That this movie wasn't about, scenes that then stopped to do a dance number, but that they were scenes that transitioned into dance, becoming the storytelling device.
Lock the keys in the car.
There was quite a bit of stuff in this film that Eleanor had written. The idea of a rainy, late summer day, things like that were in the script, and we tried very hard to get that feeling. Working on a smaller film like this, you don't often get to shoot at the exact time that you'd like. So unfortunately, we had a rainy sequence planned for a very sunny day, and we had to go ahead with it. There was talk of it on the set that it was sunny, but I think the feeling was sometimes it's could be a sun shower, and we decided to go ahead with it.
You're wild.
What?
You're wild.
All this rain was created on the set. We brought in towers and special effects. There's a funny shot coming up here. You'll notice a double in the car for her. Her hair is huge in this shot. There was a feeling that that the drive was going to be dangerous there, so they put a stunt woman in to replace Jennifer. Not Patrick though. He does all his own stunts. Same thing here. Everyone was afraid that they would fall. They were actually pretty high on this thing. We moved the log for some of this stuff to a slightly safer area. You'll notice you can't see below in some of the shots, and that's when we shot the actors. But then we had the log in another location that was higher up, and they used a stunt woman to do her stuff. But again, Patrick did his own work on that, so he refused to have a stunt person stand in for him.
And he said that Arthur Murray was given a test for instructors.
One of the things that the log scene exists is to teach balance in a way that's somewhat unorthodox.
Didn't we meet on a tightrope?
I think Kenny and I both did tightrope. We have some wonderful friends, the Mums, that a few years ago we all hung out.
This was, I think, this whole idea here was just, to find your balance and focus. That the dance.
Overcome fear.
Yeah. There's so many things here. Why one would go to these extremes to teach someone. That I know for myself that, having done tightroping and juggling and, played in other forms, is that they helped bring a sense of focus and balance and
also
confidence.
As a woman, how many men do you meet in your normal day of meeting men who are that adventurous, that wild? She even has that wonderful line, "You're wild," that puts that much love and energy and discipline into as a woman to teach you. This is an extraordinary man to have met for the time of your life for that summer. Poignantly, I asked the woman why she's seen the movie 50 times, and she said to me, I'm a single mother. My marriage didn't work out. I've worked my whole life as a secretary, and I never had the time of my life. I never had that summer, and I never had my Johnny Castle. To have that man put that kind of passion into you is incredible, and I think that's why a lot of women watch this movie 50 times.
The best place to practice lifts is in the water.
This was a case of being very lucky. We shot very late in the day. The sun had actually gone down. I had told them I wanted to shoot a dusk scene for this, and when you have dusk and the sun in a very low position, you only have it for a short period of time. So what we did is I waited for the sun to go actually behind the mountains, so there wasn't any sun, and you just have this sort of pale blue glow in the sky, which is just beautiful. And to create the sun, we floated a boat out in the water, a flatboat, and my gaffer, Mike Barrow, put a whole bunch of tungsten lights on that to create this warm sort of sunlight raking across them. So actually, when you look at it, the sun is only hitting maybe 20 feet across in the water, exactly where they are. We put a platform, sunk a platform in the lake there that they could stand on, because the lake was quite a bit deeper.
Patrick was, healthily involved in, let's go out into a field and let's go in the lake and let's take advantage of this beautiful environment. And Emil and Eleanor were only too happy to support that.
Patrick is an amazing adventurer, and I think one of the guiding principles of his life is to push himself to almost inhuman limits, go where no man has gone before. It's really exciting to be around that. I think as women, we like to follow you bad boys on motorcycles that are pushing it to the limits.
I went. George Burns was a teacher.
She's worn this blouse before, but it just looks suddenly more grown up. And look at the two of them; they're wearing the same kind of blouse together. It's just, she looks at her role model and tries a little bit to dress like her.
Hold up, watch your frame, and remember,
She's playing dress up now. I mean, that's what definitely that look was, that she's definitely playing dress up, and she's not herself yet. She hasn't sort of landed. And they wanted me to have a more uplifting bra, but I said, really, the wonderful thing about those old period bras is that they weren't, and that there you show her in this, practically frontless dress, which is based on a Marilyn Monroe dress, and she's got this big old white cotton bra, and that's so opposite of the dress. She's eventually going to have to take that bra off, and that's the wonderful thing, about this scene, that it shows what's there and what's what's coming next. It's so clear. She's got this really low-cut dress, and she's got this big white bra, and it's going to have to go. Yet she's kind of not thinking about that yet. One step at a time.
Could be. Who knows? Listen, you just gotta do something.
This is so sexy because, and she looks so ill at ease in it. That's the funny thing, is that he's going to have to put his hand on her back, on her naked back.
The Sheldrake Hotel is proud to present Johnny Castle and partner in Mambo Magic.
This was great because Jennifer was scared to death. She had a real audience on her, and that although there was great sort of humility in the beginning of this, that she had to rise to the occasion, and that everything that we had worked on now had to sort of show itself here in this piece, and that she'd worked very hard to look good in this man's arms and to be a worthy partner, and that you can now see that there is a little dancer here that emerged out of this film, in the process of making this film.
And yet her abilities are such that it's very believable that this is the level
Right.
in which she dances. I think they're terrific together. It's kind of like it was said about Fred Astaire really liked Eleanor Powell, but that Ginger Rogers was his perfect partner because she gave him sexuality and he gave her class. I think that Patrick is so passionate and so serious that her goofiness and joie de vivre gives him a lightness that it makes them terrifically adorable together, and she gives him an enormous, adorable sense of humor. I think her comedy ability in this is killer.
It is.
Killer.
I remember watching this with an audience and them busting out a couple of times during this piece. Coming Up, where she goes into the swim, where she busts out of the lift and just starts to improvise.
Come on.
Right here. Stops, and just goes into her own little jig.
And really, people should not underestimate her ability to do comedy through the body. Her physical ability to translate that humor is in the body. It's great.
Fun.
My sister, when we were children, I was obnoxiously one of the 4 swan princesses in Swan Lake, and every year my sister remained water in the background, and she was chubby, and they gave them tulle to wave. And my sister's seen this movie thousands of times, not because I'm in it, because she relates to Jennifer Gray's performance. The little shoulders a little lifted, the little attempt at being graceful, but many, many girls identified with Jennifer's performance because that average, terrific girl with a lot of heart makes good.
And I think that moment, that performance was what, Emile was looking for, was preparing us for, was hoping that we would find, it was without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Don't lose all this stuff that Jennifer is about at this time of her life. Find a way to be able to infuse the dance with that, because that's going to be the charm, that's going to keep it organic, that's going to make it real, that's going to make us root for her, that's going to make us care about her, and that's going to create a three-dimensional, honest, wonderful character. And that I think in that piece right there, all of those components that he was so excited about that existed within her personality showed themselves.
You try to keep the shadows dark. You try to edge them out rather than light them from the front. I'm always trying to create depth with a shot where, in that one in particular, there are the cars in the foreground in one color, and then the background has a cooler color of the cabins there, so that you get a sense of depth without a great location. I mean, basically this location is a series of cabins, maybe 10 or 12 cabins in a row, and that's it, and a hillside. So with that, you have to create something that, has a visual style to it.
This became Johnny's parking spot outside of actually just down the hill from his cabin near Penny's, because all of that geography had to work for the shooting.
You didn't use no ether, nothing.
We sort of designed the film very closely to the script. And then Emile and I would try to pick each of these locations so that it fit as closely as possible to what was happening in the script.
One thing that was important for me was to try and tie the characters together with camera movement. This is one scene where it's basically one take, and we were trying to tell a story with camera movement and make reveals with the shot. So you see her come in, but you don't know where she is. Then you see where she is, and you see the father. Then you see the bag, and you know what's going to happen. It all happens in one shot. The scene in the gazebo is another example of that. It was this attempt to try and connect these characters because they all sort of share this experience, and this idea of the camera connecting them was something that we tried to do in a couple scenes.
Everybody clear out, please.
I noticed in Penny's room we put a light bulb behind a paper umbrella. We wanted it sort of very early 60s feminine, hence all the brightly colored cloth, the lanterns, the one hesitates to use, I guess, the phrase these days, but sort of the hippie subculture world of the early 60s with a lot of color. We felt it very strongly again that color would help us set the tone of that room to suit her personality, which is very flamboyant and a marvelous dancer.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Houseman. I don't know how to thank you to tell you to.
What I did to help everybody understand is I drew what amounted to a site plan of our mythical hotel. And the bridge that Emile made so great a use of, the bridge over that little stream was our actual state boundary going from Virginia to North Carolina. That was our break line. The lake is at the hotel in Virginia. The little cabin that Baby stays in is on that lake in Virginia. When she goes up to the Dirty Dancing studio, she is actually climbing a stair in North Carolina. Those are the kind of intercuts. This was an interesting little place. We found it structurally exactly as you see it. We put in a minimum of furniture and dressing on the theory that, he didn't really care much about this room. It was a place to change clothes and hang out, as it were. And it sat in this kind of wonderful isolation on the side of that hill, up above what had just recently been cut in as a road to the subdivision. It was one of those places where we had, again, to grow a lot of grass, as you see in a later scene, Baby leaving in the morning. but we kept it very spare, very sort of, a guy's room, if you will, as opposed to Penny's. And bare walls, bare framing inside, no real attempt to make it homey,
Well, you took care of Penny.
Yes, but I mean the way.
Steve Lineweaver was the set decorator, did a terrific job with no money. And most of it, like that metal frame chair she was just sitting on would have come from a local thrift shop or antique store, depending on what they decided to call it.
And the reason people treat me like I'm nothing is because I'm nothing.
That's not true. You're everything.
The only things that I remember specifically coming from any distance were the chandeliers for the ballroom, the white furniture for the beach, and just miscellaneous odds and ends. Most everything else we would have found locally, or, at most would have gone to Asheville, which is not far from Lake Lure, or Blacksburg there in Virginia, which is a college town. I think the University of Virginia is actually in Blacksburg, so we did some shopping there.
You are not scared of anything. I don't know.
Me, I'm scared of everything. I'm scared of what I saw. I'm scared of what I did, of who I am. And most of all,
I think we tried to bring pink in wherever we could because it felt like her color. It felt like that the pink color came from her character. So even in a non-theatrical scene like this, we tried to introduce it and bring it in. I guess it represented innocence for us and femininity, growing femininity, something. Without it being too sexual, it seemed like the right tone for her. There actually is a red lantern off to the side somewhere, but again, we just used it as a motivating factor and brought in this color.
It was great fun working with Patrick in that he was a cowboy, and I mean that in the poetic sense, in that he just was ready for an awesome adventure. He was ready to invest himself more than he's ever invested himself in anything else at that time, and that he was fearless, and that in great agony and pain at times, which was really there, that he didn't slow anything down or prevent us from going to any place. It's just you don't get that very often, You don't get that opportunity very often in this day and age. And I know this was 17 years ago, and I'm trying to think, in the 17 years, how many other actors have I worked with in these types of situations where I've gone that far, and there aren't many.
And that's very interesting too, in terms of Emile being such a quiet, in many ways self-effacing man that could handle two bulls in a china shop.
Yeah.
That's a testament in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah. But Patrick is, for me, he was the Gene Kelly of this generation. And I just wish there was more opportunity for him to show that, because he has an endless amount of talent. He's a very gifted man. Comes from some really gifted people, too.
And I think the Gene Kelly analogy is really excellent, because that kind of masculinity in the world of dance doesn't always make itself evident. And I think that's a wonderful analogy with Gene Kelly. Well, a man's man.
At the height of Gene's career, what he brought into film was he made it attractive for a man to dance. He made it okay for guys to dance because he was a guy's guy, a man's man, as Miranda said. That at the height of Gene's career, he was the #1 box office sensation in motion pictures. And when this film hit, Patrick was the #1 box office sensation. There were parallels that Patrick showed a whole generation of men when this film came out, that it was okay to dance and to express yourself through movement, that it was cool, and that you could be a guy, you could be a man, and that you could dance too. And that Gene had that incredible ability to connect with men on that level. And so both of them had, that it wasn't only women that were attracted to this film, but all across this country and throughout the world, Dirty Dancing became this phenomena. Everywhere. I mean, we did a 2-hour special with Oprah Winfrey. She had to move out of her studio because there were 2,000 people in line that wanted to come. That men were as attracted and as excited and as inspired by his performance as women were.
And I think the women of the nation, I remember all the huge Dirty Dancing seminars, kind of informed the men of the world that they wanted to be in those kind of arms, and it was more than okay to dance with them. And I think a lot of men pleased a lot of women by going out and learning to dirty dance at that time.
Yeah, it was almost like they had to shit or get off the pot.
Yeah, dip me like Patrick dipped her. That's what we want, guys.
Jennifer, if you're out there somewhere watching this, I don't know where you are, but you are a joy. No one else could have played this part. You are so significantly responsible for the success of this film. You were remarkable.
It was just an idea. We can stay if you
I think it started to dawn on me as we were shooting that it was not a realistic film. It was not a hard reality. It was a remembered reality, and therefore unrealistic in some ways and idealized. I think the photography probably started to evolve in that way, in that it was set in reality, but it was an idealized reality. And that's that's something that came from the script and came from Emile, that he gave us the sense that it was a real place, but a fantasy, idealized and remembered. So when the lighting is in a particular mode, when the lighting is done in a particular way, it's really the best way light could come into a room, the most beautiful light that could be for that moment.
I'm okay.
When you have a limited amount of time and money, there's always things you would do different. There's always little things that you would change. I think on a budget like this, you're trading off all the time. You're compromising endlessly. But what I find on smaller films, you can't really throw money and equipment at a problem, but you can try to find an angle and find a way to shoot a scene that is right for what you have in front of you right then. If the light is good over here, but you talked about shooting a scene over there, let's shoot the scene over here and reconfigure it because the light is perfect. On a budget like this, you can't control the situation completely. You can't light it to a point where you get exactly what you want. You have to kind of go with what's there. And finding where the light is beautiful, finding that right angle that may be different than what you planned ahead of time is key. And a director who is flexible in that way, allowing you to let them show you other things than what you had maybe scheduled or planned ahead of time, is really important on a smaller movie like this.
Here's the evolution of Baby's look, okay? There you have it, you know? She's taken out her skirts. She's womanly. She's not a different character, but she's trying to be more evocative. And, you know, that's without stretching it into a contemporary look. That's a very period look, just a peasant skirt and a blouse.
It's rainy day game time. Pin a tail on the guests.
The scene where they're in the cabin, it's raining, was actually our first day of shooting. We had planned to shoot their arrival at the beginning, and it rained. And we couldn't shoot. It was supposed to be sunny and happy when they drive up and check in. So we ended up moving everything to that little cabin where the family's stuck in the rain and filming in real rain on our first day of shooting.
Quite the little joiner, aren't we?
I operated the camera myself on this film, and it was fun because quite often we would have events, even a scene like this, love-making scene, we wouldn't really stage and rehearse the scene. We would just talk about what was going to happen. And we'd turn the camera on and we roll and they would do the scene and I would react to it from behind the camera. And I would tilt off of them, pan over, I would move down, move up. And those were things that I was feeling at the moment that seemed to be right for the scene. So that was a lot of fun. The idea is to find the most beautiful light that you can, or create the most beautiful light that you can, that would exist in reality in that space. in this scene, it's sort of drizzling, raining outside, but there's this sense of daylight coming in from somewhere, and it's still, hopefully, pretty. It might, in fact, be a lot grayer in real life. So you're always looking for the balance of reality and beauty that, to create the look that you're going for.
That's the thing, baby. See, it wasn't like that.
When you read a script and you start working on a movie, you have you have your own movie in your head. You know what you think, how it should be made, and it's usually different. And so I think this was different than I had imagined, and some of it I thought was wonderful. The father-daughter relationship is a wonderful thing. It's hard to not let your experience color it, so it takes you a while, a couple of watchings to actually decide what you think. It's very hard to be really strict about what people should wear when. They show up in a location. The location's different than you thought. The walls are a different color. You have to be kind of loose about it. If you're doing your job, you're not necessarily checking to see what each location looks like. There's too much to get done. If you work well with the production designer, you're constantly talking, but there are things that look different always. And try to describe what color you're going to put somebody in. It's sometimes kind of hard. And it's quite often how I work. I pack a trunk create a closet for each character, so that if you want to change things and there's some play.
Cha-cha-cha.
I'm very proud of this scene. This was shot at a perfect time of day. I remember we scrambled in a big hurry to get there when that light came through those windows at that particular time. We had been shooting on the other side of that wall is the kids' cabin, and this was a set that was built on the other side of it, and I knew that at a certain time of day we'd been rehearsing in here. That was the perfect time of day to shoot that scene when the sun came in, and we were lucky that day. We actually had sun. And we ran in there. I said, we got to shoot at this time of day. We ran in and photographed it. There's very little supplemental light here. I think there's a bit of light in the ceiling maybe, but this is a case of when you have very little money, you have to chase the light. You have to find it at the right time and shoot it at the right time, because you just don't have the money to bring the lights in that you would need to create that look. Great Steadicam work here too. Again, we're not really communicating directly with the camera operator. He's moving through the scene as he feels it. Quite often, Kenny Ortega, the choreographer, would be right behind the Steadicam operator, sometimes manipulating him because he knew where the shot was going to go. He would guide him back, or he would push him forward a little bit, because he knew how he wanted the dance to sort of progress. This is a scene that we shot actually at night. It was dark outside, and one of these cases where you have to keep shooting. We lit the exterior and the light coming in and everything. We recreated the look of what was in there in the daytime much later at night.
Rhythm and the soul dance.
I live for that stuff. Cinematographers live not to be noticed, to try and create a seamless quality, and this is where you really bring out whatever talents you have as a cinematographer. This is where they really come into play, because you have to create something that looks completely real, but is just pure photography. It's all light. It's nothing found. You have to bring in everything, and you have nothing to work with. It's a black hole, and you have to bring in everything to make it look like something that was that existed before. Again, when we shot the dance part of it in the beginning, it was a very limited time. We had maybe 2 hours to film that scene in that light. Once it was gone and we had more to shoot, we had to light it to match it.
Sometimes it's hard to talk to, but the ladies seem to like him. See that he gives you the full half hour you're paying him for, kid.
Sometimes you can give actors clothes and you can tell them how they think they should wear them, but you ultimately have to let go because they are going to wear them. And so you might not necessarily have everything turn out exactly the way you had imagined.
He's a person like everyone else. I'm sure.
Patrick is a dancer, and that's what he felt comfortable in. You know, it's hard to. I probably would have kept him in the white T-shirt more. It's hard to convince people sometimes.
Finally get you in a union.
Oh, what union?
You know, it's perfectly fine. It's a dance. I mean, you know, the theory being that it's dance wear. Here's a piece of costuming, like this tennis sweater. Like, does that like set Robbie up as the preppy asshole right away, doesn't it? The good guy's wearing black, so he's obviously the anti-hero, and the bad guy is wearing this sort of white preppy outfit, you know, but he's really the bad guy.
I don't see you fighting so hard, baby. I don't see you running up to Daddy telling him I'm your guy.
I think this was Patrick's first scene. And again, we're losing the light here. I'm probably bringing in some daylight to match that, desperately trying to find little hot spots there in the background to give us a sense of daylight at a time when the light was probably dying quite a bit.
Johnny's cabin that I was talking about up there on the hill. And some of our grass we tried to grow.
Well, when you're a cinematographer, you're always finding the balance of what's real and what you see with your eye with what the film will record and how the film sees light. So what may look bright on a location, on a set, is in fact, depending on how you're setting the camera, quite a bit darker or quite a bit different. You know, as film becomes more sensitive now over the years, I find that you can almost photograph the way that you see something. You still need to control it though. You can't just shoot because the range of your eyesight is so much greater than the range of the film, even today. When we were scheduling it, we knew we would have dusk available to us, and we scheduled it so that we could plan to shoot the scenes we wanted to shoot at that time. We knew we would have that particular time to work with. You try to look for scenes that are transitional, that are short, because you know you can get them within a limited time frame. At that time, the dusks were coming probably fairly early. It was the East Coast in August and September, and so every day we would have a dusk, and the thought was how would we use it? How would we best schedule it? This is another scene where we tried to connect people again, using one character to lead to another character. These are difficult to coordinate because you have to coordinate all the extras and all the lighting cues and the camera movement.
What helped us move the camera around in this space as well as others is that Jeff and I and Emil work over a floor plan and literally just draw step by step by step where the camera would be. And in this instance, I knew that we would have to have all of this dressed, the actors in place and with their props in order for the camera to move. We cut there, but then Vivian comes in and she'll carry us back to Patrick. And so by planning it ahead of time, we were able to do this in pretty fluid shots.
This is our last night together, lover.
This is an old gymnasium. We built the stage that Baby's sitting on, Patrick's in front of. And if we do the other cut, we'll see the stone wall, I think. We're back on the stage. We painted these silly prop pieces, trying to do them as if a bunch of kids had done them at one of the places in the Catskills. They are my French doors that are nothing but cutouts. They're literally nothing but pieces of plywood with a doorknob and a curtain on them.
Why don't you give my wife some extra dance lessons?
We actually made all of that stone out of styrofoam, carved and painted it. and a combination of covering the columns that were there and putting in our own. All of the stonework inside this space we created. It was this big, enormous bare room with sagging wood floors. It was an enormous job to get that stage flat and level, for instance, because when we started putting weight on that end of the room, of that floor of that end of the room, it started sagging, so our stage sagged, so we had to go underneath the gymnasium and jack up the floor of the gymnasium so that it would hold our stage flat. The roof leaked, so we had to repair that, and then we realized we were going to have enormous sound problems if it rained. So we bought 6-inch thick fiberglass insulation and put it on the roof with the uncovered side up so that the fiberglass absorbed the sound of raindrops falling. We sort of built our own little sound studio in that space.
Robbie, it's me.
At this time in the 80s, a lot of the English directors were coming in from commercials and creating a beautiful, very stylistic look with smoke and backlight, long lenses, fast cutting, very graphic and very stylish photography. And I think our thought was that we would go against that those were popular films, they were beautiful. We not only really didn't have the budget to pull off a lot of that kind of stuff, but I think it was the idea that that would have been false for this story, that this film had a wonderful heart to it, and that to stylize it in that way would take away from the emotion of the story. I don't like imposing a heavy style over a story when I feel that it has its own strengths. For me, the photography comes out of the script and what's going on. This is a scene that we did at night, but lit it for dusk. It's always tricky, but I think it worked out pretty well. This was shot at dusk, but the shots of Miranda was shot at night, but lit for dusk.
We were in this dining room here a lot. I remember it must have maybe 4 or 5 days, both with the dinner scene and then with this breakfast scene. But most of the other locations were very brief, you know, a day and a half or less.
You think a lot more people would be smoking in 1963. Well, that's why it has this strange feeling that it's real, but it's set apart from reality. You know, in real life, probably everybody would have been smoking, or quite a bit more people than you see.
History doesn't exist in itself. It exists as a cycle, and clothing exists the same way. You know, the 50s were a reaction to the 40s, the war, and then the 60s were a reaction to a much more conservative time in the 50s. You know, the 70s went even further. I mean, actually, people remember sort of the late 60s as being, you know, the world of hippies, but it's really the 70s, actually. The 60s, mid-60s, were very, very conservative. And, in fact, some of the dresses in the 50s were more revealing, but the 60s dresses were looser, and, you know, you had the thought that even though there were these, you know, little shift kind of corrège dresses, that the mentality of the people wearing them was going to lead to something. In the 50s, the mentality of the people was not going to lead to something. History in clothing, in fashion, it's not separate. It's one period comes out of another period for very good reason, and now we're going into a much looser, more colorful, sexier period. We're post-war.
This is a scene I'm particularly proud of. Again, this is scheduling. It's finding the right time of day to shoot a scene and not messing with it too much. I love setting them against the background, that silhouette of them. It's an iconographic image. We were shooting in the late fall, and it's a story that takes place in the summer, but we sort of stretched the saying that, well, this would be late summer, and we would use the fall that was happening to us in reality as part of the story. You'll see a few leaves falling by in the background there. That's actually a prop guy standing on the roof there of that gazebo, tossing leaves over the edge.
We dug up whatnot in the woods and got these leaves because they weren't really falling yet. Though by the time we were through shooting, we were painting yellow ones green, near the cabins particularly, spraying yellowing trees green to keep us from tipping it off that it was getting so near to fall. And our perennial problem with grass, we wound up spraying some of it green as well because it was dying on us. Those final touches that you can make just before the camera rolls often make the difference between something you'll look at in dailies later and say, oh God, I wish I'd fixed that, or somebody had fixed that. And of course, when you leave a set and go on to the next one, everyone who arrives on that set assumes you've left it the way you want to shoot it. But in the process of shooting itself, it's things get moved, things get changed. The camera winds up in some place that you never dreamed it would be. And looking at something that if you're there, you can fix it in the moment, which I find very valuable. In a picture called Last Exit to Brooklyn, which I did years ago, I wasn't there. They were shooting a scene looking through the length of an apartment set. And in the foreground was an ironing board, a simple household thing that'd be in any house. The cover was turned toward the camera, and the cover was one of those sort of aluminum-ish looking covers, which first of all I don't think was period, and second of all was too bright. If I had been there, I would have flipped that ironing board around so that we were looking at the wooden underframing, which would have just made it go away. It would have been an interesting shape, and you'd say, oh, well, that's interesting, and your eye would continue past through the depth of the apartment. In Dirty Dancing here, there's a couple of places in the rehearsal studio where I placed either a garland of flowers or a string of something sparkly near a mirror, which just gave the scene a little bit of kick without distracting from what's going on. That just picked it up a bit. That kind of, personal touches sounds perhaps too pompous, but the kind of thing that the frame needed. And I was there to do it, and, the director looked through the camera and said, great. Boom, we rolled.
Some butcher while he moved on to an innocent young girl like my daughter.
Yeah, I guess that's what you would see.
I always think of shooting a film as sort of painting in the middle of a war. There's a lot of chaos around you. There's a lot of activity. It's very noisy. It's very busy. There's an enormous amount of pressure, and the big clock is ticking, and money is being spent every minute. And in the course of that scenario, you have to do something beautiful or painterly or exotic or sexy or whatever. And you have a bunch of guys carrying that out for you behind the scenes with the equipment and the lighting and the dolly work. All that is being done by people, and you have to communicate that and make sure that what you're getting is that image. For me, when I'm shooting, I always try to think of what it looks like sitting in a theater or at home and watching a television, and forget about all the stuff that's going on around me, because that's really who I'm photographing for. I'm photographing for that person sitting in the dark watching. So I have to remember that. There's so many agendas and so much pressure on the set that has nothing to do with that poor person sitting out there. But it's important to remember them, because that's who you're making the film for. So you have to tune out that sort of background noise and remember, as it goes through the camera, as it gets filmed, that's what the person is seeing, and that's what's important.
I look in the mirror and all I see is a young old man.
This is one of the few sets we built. We just didn't have time to shoot it for whatever reason in Virginia, and we needed the scene. So we took our bunk beds and our draperies that we had put into the cabins in Virginia and brought them down to North Carolina with us. And as you probably will realize, all we needed to build was the back wall with the window in it. So we really didn't build much. It was a tiny little set. And the other set that we built is the little locker room scene when Penny is fitting Baby's dress for the Sheldrake dance. That tiny little locker room was a little built set as well.
Kellermans, we come together, singing all as one. We have shared another season's talent, play, and fun.
This is a dress that was designed and made for Jennifer, and because of the budget, we only had one of them, so it had to have so many uses. The dance was particularly strenuous, and it's designed as a dance costume so that there's a lot of movement in there. Some little gathers under the arm to give her movement. The producers always thought that she shouldn't have wrinkles, but without that ease under the arms, the dress would have been ripped. She actually burnt her arm right before we shot this, which is why she needed the wrist corsage. She was fooling around with her husband, who'd come up for a visit, and she was hiding from him, and she hit like a sort of a hot exhaust pipe on, I think, a car.
Bobby.
I credit my gaffer, Mike Barrow, with a lot of the look of this scene. He created a lot of the colors and a lot of the effects that happened throughout the finale here. He did a great job. We had giant drums with mirrors on them that were rotating, and he had lights shining in them and flashing and stuff like that. I think I resisted him a bit because I felt, well, maybe that's too theatrical for such a time period. But he felt that the emotion of the scene was important to have a big finale, and we talked about it quite a bit. And I have to say he was right about it. I think it's beautiful, and he did a great job.
Through the war years when we didn't have any meat, through the Depression when we didn't have anything.
Lots of changes, though, Max. Lots of changes.
It's not the changes so much this time, Tito. It's that it all seems to be ending. You think kids want to come with their parents to take foxtrot lessons? Trips to Europe, that's what the kids want. 22 countries in 3 days. Feels like it's all slipping away.
But the heart needs a vacation where no cares are seen.
So let's join in just one last chorus. Visitors, staff, and guests.
There's a feeling in this scene that it's the end of the season, the end of her romance, and there's a camera movement there was important to set the mood of that there's a sadness and a melancholy to it. We did very slow pans, very slow dollies into characters, across characters. But then when Johnny comes back, the mood shifts. He's returned, and now the camera goes into a Steadicam, and moves now with him. He's driving the camera movement, and he's driving the scene, really.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
We had excellent Steadicam operators. This was Randy Nolan, who we brought in from Los Angeles, somebody that I had worked with before, and he did a great job. When Johnny walks baby up to the stage, he's actually going through the crowd with the camera and climbing a ramp that he had built up to the stage so that he could rise up to the stage and be up there with him.
The finale. I have to say that, there were a few things going on here. We took the world of the ballroom and the world of Dirty Dancing and the choreography at the very, very end. I think we created something which we called Dirty Mambo, which was bringing the two worlds together, the discipline and structure of ballroom dancing and the freedom and sensuality of Dirty Dancing, and we put them together and created a dance that was born out of both genres, and that also my heritage is Spanish and Cuban, and that growing up there were some Cuban rhythm steps that I loved, and Miranda, who is Latin in her soul, was hugely inspired by Latin dancing. And so we kind of, in this finale that we created, I think that a kind of a Latin edge came into the choreography, really full on. Where it was a little bit there in the mambo of Pres Prado and then some of the ballroom stuff, now we really allowed that sort of Latin part of ourselves to come out. And it was great fun. And Patrick enjoyed it, and the Dirty Dancers enjoyed it. And although it was modest, it was there, and it added one more layer to the dance to sort of say goodbye to the picture. So what begins here with an exhibition dance, like the movie started with Penny and Johnny, now it's Baby and Johnny, and this is, a typical kind of exhibition piece of the period.
I think also, going back to Emile being so rigorous about adhering to the story points, I remember, if I'm correct, in the story, the breakdown of Patrick's character is Polish guy who's taken an introductory course at Arthur Murray, who goes on to teach. So, though there was quite a bit of Latin dancing that was popular in the world in the late 50s, kind of beginning to die out in the early 60s, the type of mambo-esque dancing that Patrick's doing is very much in keeping with the storyline of who his character was at that time.
It was a guy that was looking to break out, to not have to be a conformist, to be able to share his passion and enthusiasm for music and dance with everybody, and not have to, to adhere to these sort of silly hotel rules of holding back and doing traditional mambos and what were some of the other dances, the pachanga,
the cha-cha,
and so this is his breakout.
Yeah.
Baby inspires Johnny now. At the end of it all, not only does she come into herself, but she inspires this man to take the biggest gamble of them all, to throw it all away, to throw away his future, his relationships that he's worked so hard to build, and to say, this is who I am, and if you don't like it, I'm ready to take the consequences. I'm ready to adventure out there and see what else there is, but I can't hold it back anymore. This is me.
And I think this makes him a heroic character in the sense that this is not a man who comes from an advantaged background. One of the most poignant lines to me when he says, yeah, I'm in the union, the painters union. He does not have the advantage of a background of dance his whole life. This is a kid who lucked out and maybe got a short, free Arthur Murray introductory course to maybe be a teacher, and has invented these steps like so many of the club dancers do, that they don't have cars, they somehow get into the club for free. They have nothing but heart and a desire to dance, and many of them come up with, actually, I think most of the dance forms. The dance filters up from the impoverished classes, the hip-hop dancers, the break dancers that didn't know any better, so they started spinning on their heads. So many ways this scene is that breakthrough thing of that street kid without any benefit of lessons, money, help, support in any way, that they have a raw creativity, a will to do it, and love to do it. And in this scene, they break through to the conservative world that says, okay, it's the new form.
This I swear, it's so true, and I owe it all to you, 'cause
Shooting this film was a kind of a mad scramble. We had a lot to do in a very short time, but it was fun because the dancing was fun, and it was fun to film events, and the dance sequences were fun because the fun that you see that the dancers are having was real. They were out there dancing. Many of the scenes were filmed complete. We would go from beginning to end and just shoot. And so it wasn't broken up. It was an actual event that we filmed, and so that was exciting. That was fun to be a part of that. And I think that comes through.
I don't think I've ever worked harder on a picture. I'm physically, emotionally, and artistically, because I always felt like this had the potential to be a hit. I don't think any of us would have dreamed it would have been, the highest grossing independent picture in history at the time, which is what I think it turned out to be. But, and I don't think any of us would have predicted that, Time magazine would write an article about it saying, women had gone to see this picture 125 times and 85 times and 90 times, which they did. I don't think any of us thought it would be a hit on that scale, but yeah, I think Emile, Eleanor, and I particularly, and to some extent Jeff, felt like we had something very special here, and just killed ourselves trying to make it come to fruition.
It's a story that every young girl can hook into. It's definitely a chick flick, As I said before, my 12-year-old daughter is known as the girl whose mother designed the costumes for Dirty Dancing. It's at camp anyway, and it's an all-girls camp. So it's definitely a girls' movie. It's definitely that, it's not a male fantasy, and it's a story that people love.
And I owe it all to you. I have the time of my life, baby.
I had a little tiny thing that happened to me in my life that helped me with this movie. My mom was engaged to a dentist, and she was about to be married. She was going to be married in 2 weeks. All of the gifts had already arrived at my grandmother's home. My grandfather was really excited about giving her away. She was marrying a wonderful dentist, a successful young man. She went to a dance with her girlfriends and danced with my father, fell in love with him on the dance floor, never stopped seeing each other. 4 days later, went back to her family to say that she had to call the wedding off, that she had fallen in love. It created this huge thing in my family's life. My grandfather moved into the garage and wouldn't speak to anybody, but the engagement was called off, the gifts were sent back, and my mother married the man that she met on the dance floor.
That's what's so universal, I think, in terms of the story. Many of us are lucky enough to kind of have a Johnny Castle dad or a baby type of a mother. There's a lot of universality in these wonderful stories, but that's how much this film touches archetypal, wonderful things in all of us.
We're gonna fall in love and it feels so right. Yes. We're gonna make love.
Once again, I just wanted to mention there are a couple of people that were just so important in this process. Jeff Jur, the cinematographer, camera operator, extraordinary work in capturing the Dirty Dancing. Greg Smith, who cast these incredible kids from the East Coast, the West Coast, and all through the Carolinas and Virginia. The Dirty Dancers themselves, who invested their hearts and their souls and their passion, and who grew up with us and found themselves on the floor. As this dance invented itself, we invented ourselves, and we became who we are a lot through the experience of making this film. And that I personally want to thank Emile Ardolino for this legacy that he's left us, this experience that he's given us. It has changed the way that I look at my work. It has given me greater things to aspire to. I say no a lot more often. I look for this in everything that I do. I look for this kind of creative opportunity in everything that is out there. And thanks to Eleanor, who created the baby.
And I would like to also thank Emile for capturing for all of us nightclub dancers. Thank you for capturing the heart that every generation of kids who let off steam in the nightclub, who dance from the heart, who wonder about their futures, who explore their budding sexuality, sensuality, heart, imagination about their futures, all those nights, for all of those street dancers. I think through Emile, through Kenny, through Eleanor, through Patrick, Jennifer, Cindy, I feel very honored to have celebrated that reality.
Yes, we're gonna fall in love.
if I asked you what is Dirty Dancing, just in a sentence, what is Dirty Dancing, to you, what would you say?
My heart.